I watched a woman in a rhinestone visor measure my dying mother's sunflowers with a ruler, and 3 weeks later she signed the order to bulldoze the house my dad built with his bare hands. What she didn't know was the quiet old lady on the oxygen tank used to be the most feared judge in 3 states. And what would you do if your sick mom had been hiding a secret like that her whole life? The first time Brenda Caldwell stepped onto our property, she was holding a metal ruler against my mother's tallest sunflower like the flower had committed a crime. I was walking up the gravel path with 2 bags of groceries in my arms, and I just stopped and stared. Her sun visor said Lake Queen in shiny pink stones. I thought it was a joke at first. It was not a joke. "You must be the daughter," she said, still not looking at me. "These are 42 inches over the limit. They have to come down by Friday." I set the grocery bags on the porch step. "My name is Sarah Whitmore, and the house behind me is the one my dad built in 1987, before any of these big new houses were here, before the lake was full of speedboats and gated driveways, before the homeowners association even existed. My mom, Diane, has lived on this land for 38 years. The HOA is 6 years old." 6. "My mother is sick," I said. I tried to keep my voice steady. "She's in the middle of chemo. Can we maybe talk about the flowers another time?" Brenda finally turned to face me, and her smile was the kind of smile that had been practiced. "Rules don't pause for personal problems, sweetheart. That wouldn't be fair to the rest of us." She tore a yellow paper off her clipboard, wedged it into the screen door, and walked back across the grass in her bright white sneakers. On her way out, she stepped on 3 of my mom's marigolds. I'm pretty sure she did it on purpose, because she paused on each one. I stood on the porch for a long minute breathing. Then I picked up the groceries and went inside. My mom was at the kitchen table with her oxygen tank rolled up beside her chair, sorting through her pill organizer the way other moms sort through coupons. She'd lost a lot of weight that summer. Her hair was tied up in a soft cotton scarf. She looked up at me and I tried to smile, but she's my mom. She knew right away. "What did she say this time? You knew she was here? I saw the visor through the window." Mom gave a small dry laugh that turned into a cough. "Read me the notice, sweetheart." I read it out loud. "Decorative vegetation exceeding approved height. Auditory pollution from wind chimes. Mailbox flag color non-compliant with community standards. 3 violations in 1 visit." Mom listened with her eyes closed, and when I finished she just nodded once and said, "Put it in the drawer with the others." "The others?" She opened the drawer next to the fridge. There were maybe 20 yellow notices in there. Maybe more. Stacked neat, like she was saving them for something. That's when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I drove into town the next morning and sat at the county records office for 3 hours, asking questions until they handed me a folder thick enough to break a toe. Property maps. Original deed. Surveyor reports from 1986. The Lakehouse sat on 3 acres my parents bought from a dairy farmer named Henrik Olson for $14,000 cash. The HOA was formed in 2019, after a developer named Caldwell Properties LLC bought the land on the other side of the road and turned it into Lake Hollow Estates. Caldwell. Same last name as Brenda. Same last name as Greg Caldwell, the HOA board president. I checked. Greg was the developer's brother. I drove home with my hands tied on the wheel. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a man in a polo shirt taking pictures of our porch. A different man, not Greg. He had a clipboard too. I rolled my window down. "Excuse me. Can I help you?" "Inspection," he said without looking up. "Routine. On private property?" "Without notice?" He smiled the same shark smile Brenda had, like they bought them in a multipack at Costco. "Ma'am, your mother signed the covenants." My mother did not sign anything. He clicked his pen, shrugged, and walked back to his truck. The truck had a magnetic sign on the door. Caldwell Properties, LLC. I stood in the driveway for a long time after he drove off. The wind chimes my dad hung from the porch beam in 1992 were ringing softly, the same 6 notes I'd fallen asleep to my whole childhood. I looked at our house. I looked at the lake. I looked at the cedar shingles my dad cut by hand, and the dock with my and my brother's names burned into the third plank, and the hair and weather vanes spinning slow on the roof. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table across from my mom. She was reading a paperback mystery novel, the kind with a magnifying glass on the cover. "Mom," I said, "how many of those yellow notices have you gotten this year?" She didn't look up from her book. 41. 41? Why didn't you tell me? She turned a page. Her hand was shaking a little, but her voice was not. "Because I wanted to see how far they were willing to go, sweetheart." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the moon come up over the water, and I tried to figure out why my mother, who was dying, who was tired, who could barely climb the stairs anymore, was collecting violation notices in a kitchen drawer like she was building something. The next morning, the bulldozer notice came. Before this story takes the turn no one in our cul-de-sac saw coming, do me one small favor and hit that subscribe button, because what my mother had been hiding in a leather briefcase for 40 years is going to flip everything you think this video is about. Trust me. You do not want to miss what's in Act 2. The bulldozer notice was taped to the front door at 6:14 in the morning. I know because I have a security camera, and I watched the footage twice. Greg Caldwell did it himself. He was wearing slippers. The paper was bright orange this time, not yellow. Notice of intent to demolish non-conforming structure. Demolition scheduled in 14 days. Reason listed. Exterior characteristics inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. I read it 3 times before the words actually landed in my brain. They wanted to bulldoze the Lakehouse. Not fine us. Not force us to repaint. Bulldoze it. I called my brother Daniel, who lives in Oregon, and my voice was so calm it scared him. "Dan. They're tearing down the house." "What house?" "Our house, Dan." He was on a flight by lunchtime. While I waited for him, I did what my mom raised me to do, which is research. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and I learned everything I could about Lake Hollow Estates Homeowners Association. I read their bylaws. I read every meeting minutes file they'd posted online for the past 6 years. I made a chart with names and dates and dollar amounts. Here is what I found. In the past 3 years, the HOA had filed demolition orders against 4 other elderly residents whose houses were grandfathered in from before 2019. 4. 2 of them died before they could fight back, and their families sold the empty lots to Caldwell Properties LLC for a fraction of market value. One of them, an 82-year-old man named Walter Briggs, had reportedly been so stressed by the violation campaign that he'd had a stroke in his own driveway while reading a notice. His daughter sold the lot the next month. To Caldwell. I felt sick. I actually had to walk away from the laptop and stand in the yard for 10 minutes. When Daniel landed, I picked him up at the airport and showed him the chart in the parking lot. He read it twice. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "Sarah, they're not after the flowers. They're after the land." The Lakehouse sits on the last big undeveloped piece of waterfront property in the entire estate. 3 acres, with the longest private dock on the lake. If the Caldwells could force my mom out, that land would be worth somewhere between $4 and $6 million to a developer. That's what the violations were. That's what the bulldozer was. It was never about sunflowers. It was a slow, patient, paperwork-shaped attempt to kill my mother and take her house. Daniel and I drove home in total silence. When we got there, Brenda was standing in our driveway with a clipboard. Again. She was measuring the porch this time. Actually measuring it, with a tape measure, while my mom watched her from the kitchen window. I got out of the car. "Brenda, get off our property." She kept measuring. "The porch overhangs by 7 inches into the setback. That's another violation, Sarah. I'm just doing my job. You don't have a job. You're not a city inspector. You're a woman in a visor with a clipboard." She finally looked at me, and her smile dropped a little around the edges. "I'm the head of the Architectural Review Committee. I have authority granted by your husband. Who is the board president? Whose brother owns the development company that's been buying up every lot on this lake for 6 years. She blinked. Just once. But I saw it. "I have proof, Brenda," I said. I have public records. I have meeting minutes. I have property transfer histories. I have all of it. She rolled her tape measure up very slowly. You should be careful what you say to people, Sarah. Words have consequences. So do bulldozers. She walked away. Daniel watched her go and let out a low whistle. Sis. You just made an enemy. She was already an enemy. That night I sat with my mom and showed her the chart. The 4 other families. The pattern. The Caldwell brothers. The whole thing. I expected her to be shocked. She wasn't. She just nodded slowly, and her eyes went soft and very far away, and she said, Sarah, sweetheart. Get me my old briefcase. The brown leather one. It's in the hall closet, behind the Christmas decorations. Mom, what? Get the briefcase. I got the briefcase. It was heavier than I expected, like it had been waiting a long time. She unlocked it with a small brass key she wore on a chain around her neck, the chain I had seen my entire life and never, not once, asked about. Inside were folders. Court documents. A bar association card with her photo on it. And a brass nameplate slightly tarnished that said, The Honorable Diane Whitmore. Superior Court, District 14. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Daniel made a small sound behind me, like all the air had left him at once. Mom, I whispered. What is this? She closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them, and they were not the tired eyes I'd been looking at all summer. They were sharp, bright, younger. Sweetheart, she said, I retired the year before you were born. There are some things your father and I decided you didn't need to grow up knowing. But I think it's time. Daniel was still holding the doorframe. Mom, were you a judge? She gave a small, tired smile. 23 years, she said. And I wasn't a nice one. Outside, a truck door slammed in the cul-de-sac. Brenda Caldwell was unloading surveying equipment onto our property line. She had no idea what she'd just woken up. Daniel poured 3 glasses of water and set them on the kitchen table like he was setting up a courtroom himself. None of us drank. My mother flipped through the briefcase the way other people flip through photo albums, and every folder she pulled out was another piece of a life I had never been told about. There was a folder labeled Hartwell vs. Meridian HOA, 1984. My mom tapped it with one finger. I wrote the dissent on this one. It's the case property lawyers in 3 states still cite when an HOA tries to bulldoze somebody's house. I stared at her. Mom, you wrote the dissent on the case that's literally about what's happening to us right now. Funny, isn't it? It was not funny. It was the least funny thing I had ever heard. There were folders for cases I'd vaguely remembered hearing about on the news as a kid. A wrongful eviction class action in 1981. A water rights case that went to the state Supreme Court in 1979. A folder labeled simply Rel with a thick rubber band around it. Mom set that one aside on the table, careful, like it was made of glass. What's that one? Daniel asked. That's the favor I'm about to call in. I asked who Rel was. She told us. In 1979, a young attorney named Marcus Rel had brought her a case about a small family-owned hardware store being forced out by a shopping mall developer using fake easement claims. Mom had ruled for the family. She'd written the opinion herself, on a Sunday, in longhand. The hardware store still existed. Marcus Rel had grown up to become the senior partner of the largest property litigation firm in the region. He sends me a Christmas card every year, Mom said. I never write back. I think he understands. Mom, why didn't you tell us any of this? She looked at me for a long time before she answered. Outside, the sun was starting to go down over the lake, and the light coming through the kitchen window was the soft gold color my dad used to say was the only honest color in the world. Because the law took a lot from me, sweetheart, she said quietly. It took my 20s. It took my 30s. It took friends I lost, and threats I had to take seriously, and a marriage that almost ended because your father went to bed alone 4 nights a week for 15 years. When I got pregnant with your brother, I sat down with your dad and I said, I want to build a house on a lake and watch my children grow up and never put a robe on again. And he said, Diane, then that's what we'll do. So we did. And I was happy, Sarah. I was so happy. She closed the briefcase. But the thing about the law is, it doesn't really let you go. It just waits. And these people on this cul-de-sac, they thought they found a sick old woman they could push around. They didn't bother looking up who I used to be. Daniel was crying. I didn't notice until I heard him sniff. He's a 42-year-old man who builds bridges for a living, and he was crying at our mother's kitchen table. She reached over and patted his hand. Don't, sweetheart. Save it. I need both of you sharp. She picked up the REL folder and slid it across the table to me. Sarah. Call this number tomorrow morning at exactly 9 a.m. Not earlier. He has a partners meeting at 8:30. When his secretary picks up, you say only this. Tell Marcus that Diane is calling in a favor. Don't explain. Don't apologize. Don't add anything. Then wait for him to call back. I called at 9 a.m. exactly. I said the words. The secretary went very quiet, and then she said, Hold the line, please. She did not put me on hold. She just set the phone down. I heard her walk away. I heard a door open somewhere. I heard a man's voice ask a question. I heard the secretary answer in a low voice. I heard the man say, very clearly, Oh my God. He picked up the phone 45 seconds later. This is Marcus REL. Is this Diane's daughter? Yes, sir. Where is the property? What's the situation? How much time do we have? I told him everything. The cul-de-sac. The Caldwells. The 4 other elderly residents. The bulldozer notice. The 14 days. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask follow-up questions. When I was done, there was a silence on the line that lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then he said, I will be there Thursday. I'm bringing 4 associates and a paralegal. Tell the judge I never forgot. I almost dropped the phone. Mr. REL. The judge, she's very sick. She might not make it to a hearing. His voice got soft. Then we go faster. He hung up. I sat at the table holding the phone for about a minute. Then I went and told my mom, and she nodded and she said, Good. Now we wait. And while we wait, we make sure everyone on this lake knows what these people have been doing. That afternoon, Daniel and I started knocking on doors. We started with the families of the 4 residents who'd been forced out. Walter Briggs's daughter cried for 10 minutes on her front porch when we told her we were fighting back. She gave us a shoebox full of every notice her dad had received before his stroke. The next family gave us an envelope full of emails. The third family gave us a USB drive with audio recordings of HOA meetings that had been held without legally required notice. Real, dated, time-stamped audio. By Thursday morning, before Marcus REL even arrived, we had a banker's box full of evidence sitting on the kitchen table. Mom looked at it and shook her head slowly. My God, she said. They were prolific. At 11:30, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Marcus REL got out. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, wearing a perfectly cut navy suit. He walked up the porch steps and stopped at the screen door, and when my mother stood up from the kitchen table to greet him, this man, this senior partner, this courtroom legend, bowed his head slightly the way you bow to someone you owe your whole life to. Your Honor, he said. His voice cracked. Sit down, Marcus, my mom said gently. And take that suit jacket off. We have a lot of work to do. Across the cul-de-sac, Brenda Caldwell stood at her front window holding a coffee mug, watching the SUV in our driveway. I was watching her watch us. And I saw the exact second her face changed. By Friday evening, the kitchen table had become a war room. Marcus REL had taken off his jacket, and his tie was loose, and there were yellow legal pads everywhere, and his paralegal, a sharp young woman named Priya who never seemed to need sleep, had set up 2 laptops and 3 printers in the dining room. The associates worked in shifts. My mom sat in her usual chair at the head of the table, her oxygen tank parked next to her, and ran the whole operation like she had never left the bench. That's a procedural defect, she'd say, pointing at a document. 48 hours notice. They had 26. Strike it. That's a forged signature. I taught your mother to sign her own name, Sarah, And she never did it in cursive after 1972. Strike it. That's a meeting that legally never happened. Mark it, Priya, Exhibit 19. The case built itself around her. By Sunday night we had a binder 8 inches thick, and Marcus had filed for an emergency injunction in county court. The hearing was set for Wednesday. The bulldozer was scheduled for Friday at 8 a.m. We had 2 days. But the Caldwells were not sitting still either. Tuesday morning I came back from the pharmacy and found the wind chimes on our porch beam had been cut down. Not taken. Cut. The chains were sliced clean through with what looked like bolt cutters, and the chimes themselves were piled on the porch like a body. My dad had hung those chimes. I sat on the porch step and cried for the first time in 3 weeks. Mom watched from the doorway. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she said, "Sarah, get your phone." "Mom, get your phone, sweetheart, and start filming." So I did. We filmed the chimes. We filmed the cut chains. We filmed the security camera footage from the night before, which showed Greg Caldwell himself, in those same slippers, walking onto our porch at 2:47 a.m. with bolt cutters in his hand. We uploaded the footage to a folder Marcus had set up. By Tuesday afternoon, a local news reporter named Janelle Ortiz had it on her desk. She called me at 4 p.m. "Sarah, is the woman in this story really Judge Diane Whitmore?" "Yes." "The Hartwell versus Meridian Judge Whitmore?" "Yes." "Are you available for a sit-down interview tomorrow morning?" The story aired Tuesday night at 6. They led with it. Local Homeowners Association targets dying retired judge, demolition scheduled for Friday. Janelle stood on our gravel driveway with the lake behind her and held up the bulldozer notice to the camera. They showed the cut chimes. They showed the 4 other families. They showed Walter Briggs's daughter holding her father's last violation notice and crying. By 7:30 p.m., the story was on the AP wire. By 9 p.m., it was trending on 3 platforms. By 11 o'clock, Greg Caldwell's home phone number had been posted online by strangers, and his voicemail was full. I am not someone who enjoys other people's pain. I have to say that, because I want to be honest. But that night, when my mom and I sat on the porch with mugs of decaf tea and watched the lights flick on and off in the Caldwell house across the cul-de-sac, I felt something I had not felt all summer. I felt the floor under my feet again. Mom leaned her head against the back of her rocking chair. "You did good today, sweetheart." "I just filmed it, Mom. That's what doing good looks like most of the time." She closed her eyes. Just pointing the camera at what's already true. The hearing was Wednesday at 10 a.m. The presiding judge's name was Hector Alvarez, and Marcus told us on the drive-in that Mom had been on Hector's interview panel when he applied to the bench in 2003. Mom had voted yes. Hector had never forgotten. Mom wore the Navy suit she'd been sworn in with in 1971. It hung off her shoulders. She walked into that courthouse on her own 2 feet, oxygen cart rolling behind her, head up, and when she stepped through the courtroom doors every single attorney in the gallery stood up. Everyone. Some of them I think were her old clerks. One man in the back row was openly crying. Judge Alvarez came in, sat down, looked over the top of his glasses, and said very softly, "Your Honor, the court is honored to have you." My mom inclined her head. "Thank you, Hector." Greg and Brenda Caldwell were sitting on the other side of the aisle, and I have never in my life seen 2 people understand a situation slower than they did. Brenda was still wearing the visor. In a courtroom. Their attorney, a man named Pruitt, was visibly sweating. He kept whispering to Brenda, and Brenda kept shaking her head, and Greg kept loosening his tie like the room was running out of air. Marcus Rell stood up to argue. He spoke for 92 minutes without a single note. He laid out the original 1987 deed. He laid out the 2019 covenant addendum with the forged signature. He laid out the unauthorized board votes. He laid out the Caldwell Properties LLC purchase pattern. He laid out the 4 other families, with photos and names and dates. He laid out Walter Briggs and the stroke and the driveway. He laid out the cut wind chimes. He laid out the bolt cutters. He laid out Greg Caldwell, in slippers, on our porch at 2:47 in the morning. When he was done, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear my mother breathing through the oxygen tube. Mom asked the court for permission to speak. Not as a party. Just as Diane. She walked to the podium. The bailiff offered her his arm. She took it. Pruitt, the attorney, looked like he wanted to climb under the table. She set down a single piece of paper. She did not read from it. I spent 23 years trusting that the law would protect people who could no longer protect themselves, she said in a voice quieter than the oxygen hiss. I'm here today as one of those people. I would like the record to show that the law still works. Then she sat down. Hector ruled in 11 minutes. The injunction was granted. The bulldozer was cancelled. The HOA's authority over our property was suspended pending full investigation. And Pruitt, the attorney, was personally sanctioned for signing off on documents he should have known were forged. Brenda Caldwell took the visor off in the courtroom. Just slid it off her head and held it in her lap like she didn't know what it was anymore. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Janelle Ortiz was waiting with 3 cameras. I want to tell you about the morning the news van showed up on our cul-de-sac, because it is the morning I learned that the people who shout the loudest are usually the people standing on the thinnest ice. There were 7 vans by 7 a.m. local affiliates first, then 2 regional networks, then a national morning show that had picked the story up overnight. They parked along the road in a long line, and reporters in puffy jackets stood holding microphones in front of our mailbox while their cameramen got B-roll of the lake. My mom watched it all from the porch, in her bathrobe, drinking coffee, looking exactly like a small, tired old woman who had nothing to do with any of it. She was loving every second. Sweetheart, she said, make me another cup. With the cinnamon. I made her the coffee. I watched a reporter from Channel 9 film Greg Caldwell trying to drive his Lexus out of his driveway through a small wall of cameras. He couldn't get out. He honked. They didn't move. He reversed back into his garage and the garage door closed, and the cameras filmed the closed garage door for about 2 full minutes. Brenda was a different problem. Brenda came out swinging. She came across the cul-de-sac at 10:42 in the morning, in a fresh visor, like she had a closet full of them, and her tape measure, and her clipboard, and she walked right past 2 cameramen and 3 reporters and stomped up our driveway. Sarah, she shouted. I want a word with you. Janelle Ortiz lit up like a Christmas tree and waved her cameraman around to get the shot. I came down off the porch slowly. My mom stayed in her chair. Daniel stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. Brenda, you are not allowed within 50 feet of this property. There is a court order. Oh, spare me with the court order. You think you can just go on television and ruin my life? Do you have any idea what people are saying about me online? My daughter saw a meme of me, Sarah. A meme. Janelle's cameraman zoomed in. Brenda, you cut down our wind chimes. We have you on camera. That was Greg. I blinked. She blinked. Greg, somewhere across the cul-de-sac in his closed garage, blinked. She had said it loud. The microphones had picked it up. Janelle's cameraman swung the lens toward her face just in time to catch her realizing what she had just done on live regional television. I mean, that wasn't on the record. Ma'am, Janelle said, walking up with her microphone. Did you just confirm that your husband, the HOA board president, personally vandalized this property at 2:47 in the morning? Brenda's mouth opened. Closed. Opened. She turned around and ran. Actually ran. Across the cul-de-sac, in her white sneakers, holding her visor on with one hand, leaving her clipboard on our driveway. Daniel walked down and picked it up and brought it inside. He set it on the kitchen table next to the briefcase. We never gave it back. By Wednesday afternoon, the Caldwell's attorney, a new one, not Pruitt, had filed an emergency motion to seal the audio of Brenda's driveway confession. By Thursday, the judge had denied it. By Friday, the audio was on every late-night talk show as a punchline. By the following Monday, Greg Caldwell had been arrested on charges of vandalism, fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. The elder abuse charge was the one that came from the Walter Briggs family, and it was the one that made Greg's bail go from $50,000 to $400,000. Meanwhile, the state attorney general's office had announced a formal investigation into Lake Hollow Estates HOA and Caldwell Properties LLC. 2 of the other 4 families had filed their own civil suits. A third family, the Briggses, had filed a wrongful death suit. The fourth family, Marcus told us, was negotiating a settlement. In the middle of all of this, my mom got worse. It happened on a Tuesday, the way it always seems to. She'd been pushing herself too hard, sitting up too long, talking to too many lawyers. She came out of her bedroom around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, took 2 steps into the hallway, and went down on one knee. Daniel caught her before she hit the floor. We got her to the hospital in 20 minutes. The oncologist's name was Dr. Patel, and she was kind, and she was honest, and she sat with us in a small room and told us that the chemotherapy was no longer slowing the cancer and that we were probably looking at weeks. Not months. Weeks. I didn't cry in the room. I waited until I got to my car. I sat in the hospital parking lot for an hour, and I cried so hard I gave myself a headache. When I came back upstairs, Mom was awake and propped up on 3 pillows. She looked at my face and she knew, the way she always knew, and she patted the bed next to her. "Come sit, sweetheart." I sat. "Did Dr. Patel give you a number?" "Mom." "It's all right. I want to know what she said." "Weeks, Mom." She nodded slow. She took a long breath through the oxygen. "All right," she said. "All right. Then we're going to be busy." We brought her home Wednesday morning. She refused hospice in the hospital. She wanted to be home, in her own bed, with her own window facing the lake. Daniel and I rearranged the downstairs office into a bedroom so she wouldn't have to climb the stairs. We hung her favorite painting, a watercolor of herons my dad bought her in 1989, over the headboard. We wheeled her bed up to the east window so she could watch the sunrise come up over the water every morning, the way she had for 38 years. She smiled when she saw it. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "You did good." That night, while she slept, I sat on the porch with Daniel and we talked about what we wanted to do with the time we had left. He said he wanted to take her out on the boat one more time. I said I wanted her to see the sunflowers come back. He said he wanted to record her telling her stories, all of them, every case, every memory, before she couldn't anymore. We did all 3. But before any of that, there was one more thing my mother wanted to do. She told me on Thursday morning, sitting up in the bed by the window with her coffee. "Sarah, I want to address the HOA. The whole community. One last time. On the record." "Mom, you don't have to." "I want to." So we set it up. Not a press conference. A community meeting. In the clubhouse. With every single resident of Lake Hollow Estates invited to attend. The meeting was set for the following Saturday at 2 p.m. Janelle Ortiz would be there with cameras. So would the Attorney General's office. So would Marcus Rell and 4 of his associates. So would my mother. And so, by court order, would Greg and Brenda Caldwell. The clubhouse at Lake Hollow Estates was a building my mother had never set foot in once in 6 years, and on the Saturday she finally walked through its doors. Every chair in the great room was full. The HOA had 241 member households. 238 of them showed up. Daniel pushed her wheelchair. She wore the navy suit again, with a small pair of pearl earrings my dad gave her in 1973. Her oxygen tube was tucked behind her ear so neatly you almost didn't see it. The room went quiet when she came in. Not gradually. All at once. The Caldwells were in the front row, between 2 attorneys. Brenda was not wearing the visor. Greg's ankle monitor was visible above his sock. My mom looked out at the room and took her time. Then she spoke. "My name is Diane Whitmore. I have lived on this lake for 38 years. My husband Robert built our house with his own hands. He is buried under the dogwood tree at the edge of our property, and I plan to be there with him soon." The room was so quiet you could hear the lake outside. In the past 3 years, the people who run this association used their authority to harass, displace, and in at least one case contribute to the death of 4 of our elderly neighbors. They did it for money. They had a plan. And when they came for my home, they came for it because they thought a dying old woman wouldn't fight back. She turned and looked directly at Brenda. "I forgive you, Brenda. Not because what you did was acceptable. I forgive you because in 3 weeks, or 4, I am going to die, and I refuse to spend any of the time I have left being angry at a small woman in a sun visor. Brenda started crying. But forgiveness is not the same as letting you off. The Attorney General will do their job. The civil courts will do theirs. And your neighbors are going to remember. I want a new HOA charter, written by a committee elected by every household. Term limits. Financial transparency. A real grandfather clause. Done by Christmas. A man in flannel stood up in the fifth row. Your Honor. I'll chair the committee. Then 3 more. Then 20. The Caldwells were voted out by unanimous show of hands. My mom passed 16 days later, on a Tuesday morning, with the east window open and the sun coming up gold over the water. We buried her under the dogwood tree, next to my dad. The Lakehouse is mine and Daniel's now. Every spring I plant sunflowers along the property line, taller than the fence. There is no approved decorative height anymore. I keep her brass nameplate on the kitchen counter. I dust it every Sunday. Be careful who you underestimate. The law, as my mother liked to say, does not really let you go. It just waits.